If you are wanting to start a podcast and your first thought is you are wondering how to make money from your podcast, I want you to stop and don't do that. Here's why. Wanting to make money from your podcast is not inherently a bad thing. However, when it is the first goal you think of when it comes to wanting to start a podcast, that's not the right place to start. Yes, your show can make money, and some shows make money from their very first episode. A lot of those shows are not going to be independent shows. Let me tell you what the best approach is when you are wanting to start a podcast. The first thing you want to think about is how to make the show as good as you possibly can, because that is ultimately what is going to get people listening to your show and then will allow you to make money from your show. And there are a few different ways you can make money, which I've covered before on this podcast. You can go check that out when you're done here. I'm someone who has had my own podcasts that made next to no money. I've worked on shows that don't make money, but they actually end up losing money because it's friends who have hired me to work on their hobby podcast and edit it for them. There are a lot of shows out there that you might listen to that probably don't make any money, or they have something like a Patreon, like a lot of indie shows do. And sure, there are shows like Blank Check that are making tens of thousands of dollars a month off of Patreon, but they didn't have that right from the start. They focused on making their podcast and doing it for years before they got to that number. And this is just one of my biggest pet peeves when people are wanting to start a podcast, and one of their first thoughts is, well, how can I make money from it? So much time and effort goes into podcasting. It is completely understandable that you want to make money off of it, but you haven't proven to anyone why they should listen to it or why they should invest in it. And it's like you kind of need a proof of concept first before you can really expect people to start paying for sponsorships on your show. And again, this does not count if it's a place like NPR that's launching a show, or if it's a show that has been started with a company like iHeartRadio. They have full teams behind them. They have sales teams. There's a lot more going into those shows. So what I'm talking about here is really just for indie podcasts. And I have also had some people just have completely unrealistic expectations as to how much their podcast could and should be making, given their download numbers, the quality of the show. So if you're looking to get the big name sponsors, like we've all heard HelloFresh, Casper, and some others on pretty much a ton of the major podcasts. And those sponsors are typically doing CPM deals, which is cost per milli or cost per thousand. You literally cannot get those sponsors unless you have tens of thousands of downloads right off the bat. And even then, you're not going to reach out to them directly, most likely. A lot of these bigger shows, again, either have sales teams or they use a third-party platform to have someone else handle the ad sales. So this would be things like True Native Media, Gumball, and there are plenty of others out there. But for the most part, you are going to have to start small as well from the brand perspective. So if your podcast is about a very specific topic, let's use Dungeons and Dragons, for instance. There is a company called Field Notes that makes a set of notebooks that are specifically for Dungeons and Dragons players. And so maybe you could reach out to them and do a small brand deal specifically for that one product that they have that is related to what you are talking about on your podcast. And sure, that's a bit of an extreme example to just have one product from a company be the sponsor for your episode, but at the same time, people might like those notebooks and then they might go buy other products from that company. So really just focus on making a great show first. There is nothing that gets under my skin more than someone immediately wanting to monetize their podcast and they haven't even recorded an episode, So when you are in the planning stage of your podcast, know that yes, you can monetize it, but that is not the primary goal that you should have at the very start.